and it turns brighter into the afternoon and warmer as a result. North East Scotland, low to mid-20s, low to mid-20s further south in places as well. And it's another fine start to Wednesday. The best of the sunshine on Wednesday morning will be in the far north and west, whilst central and eastern England sees quite a lot of cloud during the morning. That disappears back to the coast during the afternoon, leading to another warm and fine day for many. Thursday's very similar, but on Friday, some showers will return. Bye-bye.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
You could be the next Great British Giveaway winner with a whopping £36,000 in tax-free cash in your bank account. Imagine getting the winning phone call for that.
I've got some really good news for you. You've won £30,000.
£30,000 cash? Oh my God, I'm going to cry. That's brilliant news.
For another chance to win £36,000 in tax-free cash, text CASH to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus one standard network rate message, or text BONUS to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message. You can enter online at gbnews.com/win. Entries cost £2, or post your name and number to GB08, PO Box 8690, Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 25th of October. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Jubri, and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Jubzun Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the arguments. We get rid of the disrespect, and then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together, and what have we got? In my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's Patrick Christys tonight, and here we do things differently.
It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it?
It's explosive.
I mean, this is very good.
It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and he did nothing.
It's controversial.
And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born.
It's everything you need to kickstart your evening.
Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it.
That's Patrick Christys tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry. Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
Tune in to Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan. GB News royalty with your perfect start to the weekend. Lucky us! Feisty and fearless guests.
Well, I'm a normal person, so ask me.
Honest opinions.
That raises more questions than a Gary Barlow tax return.
And a few surprises along the way.
Might be cold in this studio.
That is Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan. 8 to 9 only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, good evening. It's me, Jacob Rees-Mogg, on State of the Nation tonight.
Very important to me that the rules are followed. I've always said that. I said that before the election. I've reinforced it after the election.
But the rules weren't followed, which is why he could be facing the end of his political career as the Tories write to the Standards Commissioner to investigate crooked Keir's dodgy donation dealings. So Keir Starmer has flirted with the idea of processing migrants in Albania. And I'll be explaining how this is all smoke and mirrors. Is the US on the brink of civil war as Donald Trump survives a second assassination attempt in a matter of months? We'll be assessing the febrile political atmosphere in the United States.
What do you say to your victims, Huw Edwards?
As Huw Edwards is handed a 6-month suspended sentence, I'll be reminding the left-wing activist elites that they were, as ever, on the wrong side of history. Plus, in light of some news regarding the nutritional status of fruit smoothies, I will be, for the first time ever, drinking one. State of the Nation starts now. by my panel, Telegraph columnist Tim Stanley and the author and broadcaster Amy Nicole Turner. As ever, let me know your views, mailmog@gbnews.com. But now it's your favourite time of the day, the News Bulletin with Sophia Wensler.
Jacob, thank you. Good evening from the GB newsroom. It's just gone 8 o'clock. These are your headlines. Junior doctors have voted to accept a government pay deal worth a rise of 22.3% on average over 2 years. The British Medical Association thanked junior doctors in England for voting, with 66% of junior doctors in favour of the deal. Health Secretary Wes Streeting said he's pleased they've accepted the government's pay deal.
It was an essential first step for us to cut waiting lists and reform the NHS, that we ended the strikes that were plaguing patients in terms of delayed operations appointments and procedures, and also causing misery for junior doctors who should feel optimistic and confident about the future of the health service they're working in. So to have achieved this deal, a fair deal for patients, a fair deal for taxpayers and a fair deal for junior doctors so quickly will be a huge source of relief for everyone across the country.
In other news, disgraced BBC presenter Huw Edwards has been spared jail after admitting to accessing indecent images of children, but the judge said his long-earned reputation is in tatters. It comes after the 63-year-old was sent 41 illegal images by convicted paedophile Alex Williams over WhatsApp. The court also heard Edwards paid Williams hundreds of pounds after receiving the images. At Westminster Magistrates Court this afternoon, Edwards was handed 6 months imprisonment, suspended for 2 years. It means he doesn't go to prison, but is subject to a probation period. Now, the Prime Minister has reaffirmed his commitment to cracking down on smuggling gangs after high-level talks in Rome. Sir Keir Starmer met with Italian leader Giorgia Meloni to discuss what he called Italy's remarkable progress in halting Mediterranean boat crossings. It comes after Italy's recent controversial deal with Albania to handle asylum claims. In a joint press conference, both leaders underscored their commitment to supporting Ukraine and pledged to work together to fight human trafficking. And in the US, the suspected gunman in the apparent assassination attempt of former US President Donald Trump has appeared before a court in Florida. Ryan Routh is charged with federal gun crimes, possession of a firearm by a convicted felon, and possession of a firearm with an obstructed serial number. Reports suggest a Secret Service agent saw the barrel of a rifle sticking out from bushes on the perimeter of Trump's international golf course in West Palm Beach. According to phone records, Routh was in the wooded area near Trump's golf course for about 12 hours. Trump, who is unharmed, has posted on social media saying it was certainly an interesting day. Those are the latest GB News headlines. Now it's back to Jacob.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Welcome back to State of the Nation. One of Sir Keir Starmer's favourite platitudes over the election period was this.
We've changed the Labour Party, returned it to service, and to replace that politics of performance with the politics of service. And one of the big changes, if there's a Labour government, is politics returned to service. Turn the page on an era of politics as noisy performance and return it to public service.
He is so pious, isn't he? The Reverend Starmer preacheth the lesson. And we were told in Labour's manifesto they would be setting the highest of standards in public life. It criticised the Tories for failing to expel MPs who broke the rules. For months, Labour tried to sit on the moral high ground, but now Sir Keir Starmer, along with his posse, are tumbling down the hill head first. First, the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, effectively confesses that she didn't declare the donation she had received from Ian Caulfield before appointing him to the Treasury and not notifying Treasury mandarins within the required time period. Then, a Labour donor was given a Downing Street pass, and now it emerges that the same donor who paid for the Prime Minister's amazingly fashionable, elegant, highfalutin wardrobe was also paying for Lady Starmer's clothes. I'd be a bit miffed if some strange man were paying for my wife's clothes, but never mind. This donation was not declared, which means the Prime Minister may have broken parliamentary rules. The government has feigned ignorance, claiming it believed it was compliant after seeking advice on a different matter before belatedly and begrudgingly making the Lady Starmer declaration. But Sir Keir Starmer, once labelled by his Culture Secretary Lisa Nandy as Mr Rules, was the Director of Public Prosecutions, something he boasts about with a great deal of frequency to show how wonderfully law-abiding and pious he is. So he, of all people, should know that ignorance of the law is no excuse. But is the Prime Minister ignorant of the rules? Hold on a moment. Didn't he say this back in 2021?
The Prime Minister will be aware that he's required to declare any benefits that relate to his political activities, including loans or credit arrangements, within 28 days. 28 days, Prime Minister, yes. He will also know that any donation must be recorded in the register of the Minister's interests, and that under the law, any donation of over £500 to a political party must be registered and declared.
So he isn't ignorant of the rules after all. Meanwhile, for the crime of an uneaten cake in a Tupperware box, Boris Johnson was dragged through the Privileges Committee's kangaroo court and then hounded from Parliament. Is the Privileges Committee going to investigate Sir Keir? Surely he deserves the same treatment as Boris Johnson had. Unquestionably, the Standards Commissioner, Daniel Greenberg, an extremely intelligent and capable man, needs to open an investigation immediately. Starmer has paraded himself as the man of righteousness. But now we know he's too mean to buy his wife a frock. His hypocrisy is exposed, and perhaps he should be defrocked. As ever, let me know your views. Email mailmog@gbnews.com. Well, I'm joined now by distinguished former Labour MP, Sean Simon. Sean, thank you very much for joining us. What defence can Keir Starmer make for failing to declare when he said in the House of Commons in 2021 that the rules were perfectly clear to Boris Johnson?
Presumably the thing that he was confused about was whether the rules applied in exactly the same way to somebody buying clothes for his wife, which is not immediately necessarily obvious, requires a parliamentary declaration. As you say, it's quite unusual for people to buy clothes for your wife. I doubt there are specific rules about people buying clothes for people's wives. That they then did subsequently seek advice about this, and very soon afterwards, in a very proper way, he's added it to the loads of stuff that he has declared, because as you perfectly well know, he is actually a very proper and sober character who is indeed a stickler for the rules, and that's why we're talking about this. Because
actually, what I know is that he's a prize humbug, because he gave no quarter to Boris Johnson. He didn't say there was any doubt about the rules. With the House of Commons rules, there is a safe harbour provision. If you don't know what you're required to do, you can go to the Commissioner and say, what am I supposed to do? But you have to do that within the 28-day period. This is a clear failure to follow not just the rules, but the guidance around the rules. And for somebody so pious, that seems to me pretty serious.
Well, I mean, what is the crime? Is his crime one of piety, or is it that
hypocrisy?
Is it that it took him? Well, so is it hypocrisy? Is it piety, or is it that it took him a few extra weeks over the course of a general election and assuming leadership of a great country to inquire about declaring the payments for his wife's clothing?
But Sean, isn't that the key point? That he didn't declare it in the general election, so voters didn't know that he'd got this benefit. There was an interest in covering it up so that he looked as if he wasn't taking money from anybody, particularly not from a Labour peer who is an influence peddler.
So, I mean, I hope we get a chance to come back to that slur against the Labour peer. But You know perfectly well, I know that you know, and you know that I know that you know, that Keir Starmer was not in the general election thinking, or I won't mention, I will declare all the payments for my own clothing, but I won't declare anything about my wife's clothing because I mean to cover that up till after the general election. Of course not. He declared all this kind of payment about his own clothing. It just didn't occur to him. And surely you will accept he had other things on his mind. He also had to declare his wife.
Because he was a former DPP, and the DPP knows, the Director of Public Prosecutions knows, that ignorance of the law is no excuse. There are criminals up and down the country who would say, oh, I'm sorry, officer, didn't know that was against the law. That doesn't stop them going to prison, does it?
Well, it's not against the law, and it's not about anything that he's done, and it's not surprising that quite arcane rules about very unusual circumstances that don't directly affect him or his staff, but affect his wife's clothing. It's not surprising that it took the people around him. Because let's be honest, are you really saying that Keir Starmer himself personally is and should be getting up every morning, running through a checklist of what he should and shouldn't have declared that day? I mean, obviously he's got people doing this for him.
But that's a feeble excuse, because the standard he expected of Boris Johnson was that he should be doing it for himself. And is it credible that a man doesn't know that his wife has had £5,000 worth of clothes given to her by a major donor to the party?
It is perfectly credible that he doesn't realise that, and I don't even know whether it is the case, but it's perfectly credible that it doesn't occur to him that he necessarily has to make the same parliamentary declaration about his wife's clothes as his own clothes, given that she's not a member of Parliament or anything.
But he should have known that there's the safe harbour provision in the rules and that you can ask the Commissioner, should I declare this? And once you've got that advice, if you follow it, you are in the clear. And that's known to all MPs. That's completely routine.
But presumably, at the first point at which this occurred to them, stroke him, they then sought advice about it. We know that they sought advice twice. They didn't think, should we declare this or not? Maybe not, but let's keep it under wraps. I mean, that's bonkers, because it's the fact that they haven't declared it. The only issue is that they're a few weeks late declaring it. If they just declared it at the time, we wouldn't be having this conversation. Well, we would.
It's quite serious, though, when the Prime Minister gets a £5,000 donation support from an influential peer, isn't it? That if you think you can sidle money off to people's spouses, that's the first route to corruption.
Well, it isn't, though, is it? And Wahid Ali is, let's be very clear, because viewers will not necessarily all know this. Wahid Ali is not some kind of dodgy businessman who's trying to get influence by making financial donations. He's he's a Labour peer. He's a working Labour peer who's
paid for the Prime Minister's glasses and his wife's frocks.
Exactly.
Come on.
Exactly. In a
Why would you do that other than for influence?
But because you want the Prime Minister and his wife to have the kind of clothes that people expect to see the Prime Minister do. Right. If he was in a scruffy suit and his wife was in a scruffy frock, you'd be the first to mention it, I'm sure.
All right. Thank you very much, Sean. Pleasure to speak to you. But with me now is my panel Telegraph columnist, Tim Stanley, and the author and broadcaster, Amy Nicole Turner. It's a bit mean of him not to be able to buy his wife a frock, isn't it?
Well, I heard he wasn't just buying the frocks, he was buying everything underneath as well.
Oh, my goodness. Let's not go into those details.
But the thing is, I was pulling my hair out in that interview because nobody cares about this little calculations about the rules and stuff. It's the fact that we have a Prime Minister that is on six-figure salary and can't buy his own clothes. I think that's the thing. It's how it looks. And today, people were sharing stories about when Jeremy Corbyn was offered the same luxury. And he said, no, I'm going to buy my own suits. I can buy my own suits. People cannot relate to someone having other people dressing them. I mean, plenty of people are on very, very modest salaries and are expected to look smart, and they manage it. It's how it looks. I don't care about whether it's declared, because it was declared, because also Keir Starmer was the one that said, oh, do I need to put this on the register of interest? It's the fact that it's on the register of interest.
Well, it was late, but it's pretty...
But he was still the one that said...
It's pretty grubby, isn't that the point? That, yes, of course, the Prime Minister's wife, representing British fashion, can borrow clothes from leading fashion designers and so on and so forth, and hire them even. I think Gordon Brown's wife borrowed clothes or paid a higher charge for them. That's perfectly respectable to represent Britain abroad. But have a clothing allowance from a Labour peer, it's pretty grubby.
And it seems strange. What does this Labour peer particularly have an invested interest in fashion? And it sort of feels a lot like... I mean, we talked about this before, and I said, what comes first, the expertise or the donation? But with this one, fashion, that's not his expertise, so it just seems a bit like, what's he getting in return?
Yeah, that's the question that arises. Why do you give the Prime Minister £20,000 personally, then another £5,000 for his wife, to give him new spectacles and his wife new clothes? It just doesn't smell right.
Well, I suspect Sean Simon would say he wanted them to win the election. And as he said, scruffy leaders tend not to win. Michael Foot, snappy leaders tend to. Although I have to say the cost of living crisis must be bad if you're having to rely on... If even Keir Starmer has to rely on private donations to dress his wife. Look, I think the whole scandal is trivial, but what it does do is it personifies a growing problem with Keir Starmer, which is that this is the man who backed the Corbyn manifesto and then ditched it, who said we must maintain the winter fuel payment and then cut it, who said, and we should discuss this later, that the Rwanda plan was wrong, but then flew to Italy to say how good the Albanian plan was. It personifies this sense that he's been elected on a false prospectus, that he's presented himself as one thing, which is a kind of a puritanical Cromwell figure who can do no wrong, it was he who cut down the cherry tree. But in reality, he's actually a politician like everyone else, choosing not just clothes, but policies on the basis of what looks good.
And hypocrisy is deeply unpleasant, that if he had said, well, it's fine for a Prime Minister to have his flat redecorated by donors, and that Boris doing that's all fine, nobody would mind. And then if he said, well, I have my clothes paid for, that would all be of a piece.
Yes.
But he was so critical of Boris for having donors support his lifestyle, and then it turns out he's doing it himself.
Oh, I know, but isn't that like criticising a lion for going after a gazelle? Isn't it the nature of politics that even if the other side's doing something you know you would do yourself, you still go for it? And that's a problem with politics, isn't it? That hypocrisy is sort of in it, like into its DNA.
Up to a point, but if you've criticised for somebody for doing something, don't you at least wait a decent interval before doing it yourself, rather than doing it straight away?
I just think it's so generic. Look at the holidays thing. It's always the case that Prime Minister goes on holiday, leader of the opposition says, I can't believe he's on holiday. Then as soon as that person's elected, they go on holiday. Look at pay for work outside of Parliament. Nigel Farage is being criticised. Even directly, they might legislate to make it possible for Nigel Farage to lose his job. David Lamb is presenting LBC. So this hypocrisy runs through politics like Brighton Rock.
People say, oh, well, who would get into politics? Who would want that job? But the more you hear about it, free holidays, free clothes, free everything.
All right.
Sounds
like going on Oprah.
Well, thank you very much, my panel. In a moment, Starmer has been busy giving the illusion of being robust on illegal migration with the Italian Prime Minister, but I'll be explaining why. It's all more smoke and mirrors. Plus, first time ever, apparently, I'm going to be drinking a smoothie, albeit reluctantly.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
I'm not saying I don't want to be a mum, and I'm not saying I don't want to work, but it's definitely not easy.
It's just really tough for us mums, you know. Our job's never done, our work is never finished, and I think it's this movement, the real out-of-office movement, is something that just really resonates with me, and I think we should all talk more about how much work we do. I think a woman's work is never done, but I just think we all feel guilty. We have that mum guilt, you know. If you're working and being successful, you wish you were at home with the kids, and if you're at home, you're thinking, am I doing enough work?
Yeah, and of course the cost of childcare in this country means that a lot of families just frankly make that decision to have one of the parents stay at home, usually the mum, and they're just being squeezed out of the economy, and that's not good either.
Once you've done your job as a working mum, you come home and you're doing another 8 hours on top of it.
Mothers have a tendency, definitely historically, just to crack on with it. It's just something that they are expected to do, that they do without moaning. And now it's like,
We're talking about it.
Are we getting to a stage
always
where
go down that well? In
Yeah.
my experience, I have had someone say to me, "Well, if you can't handle it, why do you have kids?"
Oh.
You know.
Absolutely, absolutely. And yet, exactly that. We just need to talk about it, and I think it's healthy, and I think that's the main thing now, that we should be brave enough to be able to say, do you know what, sometimes it's difficult, but I'm really proud to be a working mum, and I tell my daughters that. I work really, really hard, and it's a good work ethic for them, you know, and that's what, you know, this campaign's all about.
Is there some resistance still, do you think, from some parts of society?
I do think there's resistance, and that's what this is about, is to try and get people talking about the fact that it has been awkward in the past, and some people don't understand a working mum's life, and that's why we need to try and talk about it.
GB News, the People's Channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
Weekdays on GB News. Wake up to breakfast every day from 6 a.m. Followed by Britain's newsroom at 9:30. At noon, it's Good Afternoon Britain. Followed by Martin Daubney from 3 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, though.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Well, we were talking about Donorgate, and the mail mogs have come in. Mike says the sanctimonious Starmer will break the rules and wriggle away. Remember, he committed the same crime as Johnson in the Beergate episode. He slipped away on that occasion. He is a lying hypocrite, not fit for the office he holds. And Graham says Labour and Starmer are rapidly learning that those who live in glass houses should not cast stones. Graham, I think you have hit the nail on the head. Sir Keir Starmer continued on his EU reset tour today, meeting the Italian Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni.
The challenge of irregular migration. This is a problem across Europe, for both of our countries in particular, but across Europe. As Director of Public Prosecutions in Britain some years ago, I saw the important work that can be done across borders on issues like counter-terrorism. And I've never accepted, as we discussed, that we can't do the same with smuggling gangs. And now, of course, Italy has shown that we can.
He does love mentioning that he used to be the Director of Public Prosecutions, even if he can't obey the rules. But before meeting Ms Meloni, he hinted that he might follow her right-wing government's policy of processing migrants in Albania, giving the impression of being tough on illegal migration. However, whether they're processed in the UK or in Albania, under our current rules, the majority of applicants will be accepted, and therefore such a policy would be futile. Well, I'm joined now by my most distinguished panel, Telegraph columnist Tim Stanley and the author and broadcaster Amy Nicole Turner. Tim, we accept 90% plus of Syrians and Afghanistanis who get here and claim asylum in any legal mechanism. Just processing them abroad and then having them back to the UK wouldn't change that, would it?
That's the key thing. That's why an Albania plan isn't the same as the Rwanda plan, because the reason why the Rwanda plan had more steel in the glove was the threat that you'd get sent, because you'd be automatically sent to Rwanda and in effect you're being deported to a third country. The means of your arrival is deemed illegal, and therefore that's breaking the rules, so you go to Rwanda and you don't come here. Whereas what they're proposing is your process in Albania, and therefore it's feasible that you might be sent to Albania and then come to Britain once you've been accepted.
If you went to Rwanda and you got asylum, your asylum would be in Rwanda, not back in the
exactly.
UK.
It was really deportation.
Whereas this, if you got asylum in Albania, you'd come to the UK to live and to get benefits and so on. So actually, there would be no
benefits, or just work and contribute and become a citizen with refugee status.
But there'd be no disadvantage to coming. There'd be no deterrent to coming over.
That is true. I think the key thing to bear in mind is that Meloni has achieved something like a 65% reduction in people coming to Italy from North Africa, both by beefing up the military and the navy, but also by paying Tunisia and Libya to patrol their own borders more effectively. So this suggests that policing can indeed make a big difference.
But policing makes the difference rather than Albania. This is a distraction, another distraction by Starmer, who got rid of the one policy that had a chance of deterring illegal asylum claimants.
Well, deterrence measures historically don't work. They just cost lots and lots of money, offload our responsibility and push the problem away somewhat. But they don't actually prevent any of the deaths, which is what we always say that we are aiming to do. We're trying to prevent tragedies in the Channel.
They prevent deaths if people aren't taking the journeys.
But people are going to take the journeys. They're always going to take the journeys. So if we were really, really serious, which I think Keir Starmer previously was when he ran for leadership, when he said refugees welcome, would be to re-establish safe and legal routes, to take the demand for the people smugglers, reduce it greatly, and that would prevent people from dying in the Channel, because you can't prevent them from leaving the countries where they are, the countries they're fleeing.
Look,
but you can give them a safe journey here and grant them refugee status quickly.
I'm not against the theory of safe and legal routes. I thought what David Cameron did in terms of Syria was absolutely right, was an inspired plan.
Let's do it again.
But that doesn't stop people who wouldn't qualify for that route coming via the boat journey route. So you don't reduce the numbers, you increase the numbers.
It would definitely drastically reduce the numbers, because when people arrive and they claim refugee status, even though the processing is so backed up and there's such delays in processing, which is why we're spending billions on hotels, which is why people are claiming benefits in the meantime, around 86% of them are granted refugee status.
But lots of people who come here would not be coming through a safe route. When we had the safe routes, we were taking women and children from camps near Syria. We weren't taking young, fit men. So the young, fit men would carry on paying the people smugglers to try and get to the UK. So the numbers would just increase by the number you were taking through the safe route.
And you know from the last two tragedies that we've seen in the Channel, there were children, there were women, there were pregnant women. So at the moment,
as a
we are forcing those people to
you're
take
over
those
80%
journeys.
are young men who are coming.
I don't know if that's...
Yeah, those are the figures that come from
I don't know
government.
why. Do people think that young men don't also have reason to leave their country? They're not also facing persecution, they're not also facing torture. Just because they're young men doesn't mean they're any less worthy of help. And if we continue down these roads like Keir Starmer has today, we are just offloading our responsibility. At the moment, I think we do not take our fair share of refugees. We could take more. We are more than capable of offering that. And is it not our moral responsibility to take our fair share of people?
We've taken hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians and Hong Kongers. We have taken a large number of people in the last few years.
Compared to the rest of Europe,
I think I'm sorry, I just think they're as well-intentioned as everything you say is. I think there are a couple of assumptions behind it that I don't share. One is the assumption that everyone trying to come across the Channel is indeed a refugee, even if, by the way, they get refugee status. That doesn't necessarily mean they are technically refugees, because it's more than probable that we've just been waving them through the system in order to get our backlog down. There is a distinction between someone seeking political refuge and someone moving on the basis of economic need. It's a very vague distinction, but it is there and it must be maintained. But also, you said at the beginning of all of your remarks, people will come, people will make this movement. But I come back at that with, but they shouldn't, because it's dangerous. And they may well come, but our country has a right and indeed an obligation to protect its borders. It doesn't matter if they will indeed come. OK, let them try. But Britain will try and stop them.
I think we have a responsibility, and I think you could say they shouldn't, but what if they don't have the luxury of that option?
They do, because they pay large sums of money to cross an entire continent in order to do it, passing through several safe countries.
Even more so that they don't have an option. They're willing to leave everything they own, and come across the Channel, spend all their money.
But you've just said they don't have anything to leave. You've just described their background as torture and human rights abuses and poverty. So you say they're leaving everything they have. You've just said they've got nothing to leave behind.
One example of somebody leaving Afghanistan. They will leave behind a house. They will leave behind a family.
But they've still put together thousands of pounds to pay the people traffickers.
So
they're not completely destitute.
These are all different...
The people who can pay people traffickers.
Just because someone has...
But also, if you're going to offer them a safe route, you can't offer them a safe route out of Afghanistan.
I'm afraid we're going to have to go to some messages from our sponsors, so thanks to my panel. Is the United States on the brink of civil war? Find out in a moment as we examine yet another assassination attempt on former President Donald Trump.
Hi there, welcome to the latest forecast from the Met Office for GB News. It was missing throughout much of the summer, but higher pressure has now arrived. There will be some cloud in places, but for most it's clear spells through the night and during the next few days. Under this higher pressure that's centred over the UK, that's pushed a cold front south. But another weak front will move into the far northwest overnight. That's going to bring some thicker and lower clouds, so fairly murky and damp in places. Lewis-Harris sky, as well as Shetland, seeing some light and patchy outbreaks of rain. Elsewhere, clear skies. Under those clear skies, temperatures falling 2 to 4 Celsius in some sheltered spots across central and southern UK. A few mist and fog patches first thing. They're not going to last soon enough. Clear skies and sunshine return across the UK. That is, except for the Northern Isles and the far north and northwest of Scotland, where it will be a grey, misty and damp start in places. Best of the sunshine across Scotland, we'd be through the central belt, eastern Scotland, and Northern Ireland seeing some decent sunny spells. But for much of southern Scotland, England and Wales, it's blue skies from the word go, and that's how it remains effectively throughout much of the day. Some patchy cloud, most likely across East Anglia and the southeast. Kent seeing a fair amount of cloud moving in. But for the north and northwest of Scotland, the cloud actually thins and it turns brighter into the afternoon and warmer as a result. Northeast Scotland, low to mid-20s, low to mid-20s further south in places as well. And it's another fine start to Wednesday. The best of the sunshine on Wednesday morning will be in the far north and west, whilst central and eastern England sees quite a lot of cloud during the morning. That disappears back to the coast during the afternoon, leading to another warm and fine day for many. Thursday's very similar, but on Friday, some showers will return. Bye-bye.
Join me, Neil Oliver, every Sunday night at 6 p.m. on GB News. And if an hour is not nearly enough for you, go to gbnews.com for special extended episodes online every Friday at 9 p.m, where we can truly get into the nitty-gritty of what's going on. GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking...
This is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. I'm still Jacob Rees-Mogg. Is America on the brink of civil war? After a second assassination attempt on Donald Trump's life, the political violence in America seems to be out of control. While the former president was playing golf on Sunday, a Secret Service agent spotted a rifle sticking out of a fence. The agent opened fire and the gunman was later detained on a motorway. Mr. Trump has responded defiantly, "Nothing will slow me down. I will never surrender." Well, I'm joined now by a very distinguished figure in American politics, friend of Donald Trump's, Christopher Ruddy, the CEO and founder of Newsmax Media. Christopher, thank you so much for joining me. How worried are you about stability in the United States with this election seeming to get more and more violent?
Well, I'm worried about the overall political system even before the violence. And we've seen, I think, a weaponization of the legal system here that is more indicative of a third world banana republic than the United States. There's been an unprecedented legal war aimed at the former president with 4 criminal indictments. And I think any lawyer that looks at it honestly would say that these are pretty flimsy cases. They have brought even the one that had the 12-0 conviction in New York, that a Manhattan jury that got all their news from the New York Times, basically saying he was guilty. He was alleged guilty on a sexual harassment case where there was no evidence he ever met the lady who made the allegations. There was no forensic evidence and no evidence of anything. It was just an allegation. And he was convicted, and then he was forced to, or accused of paying $150 million in liability fees. I mean, it's like beyond what we're seeing here. And now, on top of all of this, Jacob, we have these attempts on his life.
Now, this seems to me to be really serious because there is a history in America of assassinations of political figures. But if Donald Trump had been assassinated in either of these two attempts, the effect on politics would have been catastrophic, wouldn't it? It would have been hard to maintain law and order.
Well, it's hard to speculate. I do think that we are in a situation where there is tremendous amount of polarization and anger. And a lot of it, started with the Democrats in during the 20 election. After the George Floyd situation, we saw a situation where there was tremendous violence throughout the United States. That seems the milieu of that has continued in the past several years. And it's not been good. The Democrats are quick to blame President Trump somehow for these, as if he caused people to want to kill him. If you watch some of the other programming here, the MSNBCs, the CNNs, the hyperbolic rhetoric that they've used against the president, I think has opened the door to this.
And so what do you think happens from here? Do you think the Secret Service can protect presidential candidates properly? Are there questions for the Secret Service to answer in terms of how it's protecting Trump?
Well, I mean, Joe Biden's response was basically they need more money and resources. It's sort of a typical government's bureaucrat anytime they're faced with a problem. The Secret Service has enormous resources. It has field offices all over the United States. They just need to basically guard a former president. He's on the move. He's a candidate. He represents currently half the country in this election. He may be the next president again. It would be easy for them to have extra security. And if they can't, within the Secret Service, get the resources, there's plenty of federal agencies. The FBI, there's Homeland Security. They could draw upon agents. And beyond that, they could give resources to local police to show up. Like we saw in this golf course episode, apparently this guy was lying in the bushes a few holes ahead, but the Secret Service didn't have people guarding the whole perimeter of the golf course, which is pretty amazing. But right, it's not...
One final thought, because we're running out of time. Donald Trump's a friend of yours. Is he in good spirits after this? He says he's never going to surrender, very Churchillian. Does this actually give him more determination, or does it have an effect on him?
Well, I think the first shooting had changed his perspective on things and made him even more determined. I would say he's a very determined guy, perhaps the most determined person I've ever met. But I think after the first experience, I think the second experience maybe only solidifies. I haven't spoken to him. I have been in communication with him and his advisors, and they tell me everything is fine. He feels very secure. Jacob, he's not a guy that sort of gets down or depressed. He's a fighting guy, a fighting Scotsman maybe, and he I think is very resilient, and he's going to see this as even more reason why he needs to campaign and win.
All right. Thank you, Christopher. Always a pleasure to talk to you, even remotely, but thank you for joining us this evening.
Nice seeing you.
With plans to ban outdoor smoking and junk food adverts on television, we all know that the Labour Party loves to tell people how to live their lives. But that is precisely why it was strange to hear the Prime Minister say he didn't want to meddle in people's lives with respect to the biggest crisis of all, chronically low birth rates. While other European countries are encouraging citizens to have more children, Labour's response as ever is crisis. What crisis? Well, still with me is my distinguished panel, Telegraph columnist Tim Stanley and the author and broadcaster Amy Nicole-Turner. Amy, he's such an old humbug, isn't he? He's always telling us how to lead our lives. And then he's asked a difficult question. He says, oh, it's none of my business.
I don't think he's telling us how to live our lives. I think it's his job, it's the state's job to protect us.
From ourselves?
Within limits.
So how does that differ from telling us how to lead our lives?
The junk food advertising is about children, protecting children. I don't think this... it's not about telling us... It's about what do we need to protect us? We need a functioning NHS.
But isn't it parents' jobs to look after their children?
This is all in the vein of preventative health care. I want the state to provide me with health care.
I don't want parents to look after their children.
Preventative health care. Yeah, but not all parents are. Not everyone had a nanny like you. We need the nanny state.
So he wants not to tell parents that it's a good idea or families that they should have children, but to tell them then how to bring up their children.
The thing is, it's empty. Politicians saying have more children. It doesn't help anyone. What we need, if we want to have more children, because the desire in women hasn't really changed. Women generally want to have children, but they aren't as much. So why is that? I think it's to do with housing. We can't afford houses. We don't want to have a baby while we're still renting. We can't afford childcare, particularly with the price of housing. And childcare is the highest in Europe, so that needs to change. And also flexible working. Most women don't want to have children for fear that they're going to lose part of their career. We've sat here and debated loads about flexible working. You've been against that. So you're actively discouraging women from having children yourself.
Well, I'm had 6 of my own, so I've done my bit. But, Tim, isn't this the Labour Party again ignoring a problem, which is actually quite a serious one, and it ties in with the migration crisis, ties in with long-term economic growth, it ties in with tax and spend, and Starmer's just closing his eyes?
I think it's the biggest issue. Demography is destiny, and if the population turns into one in which a tiny group of adults are supporting a vast number of old people, the economy collapses, society collapses. It's not good. Britain is behind European countries and both left and right governments in being willing to talk and act on this. And part of the reason for that is that we have plugged the demographic gap with large-scale immigration. You cannot go on doing that. You remember the data last week that suggested that actually low-skilled immigrants are a net drain on the economy. So it doesn't even work. But if you just continue down this path, at some point that tap will turn off and you'll have a demographic crisis. And I just want to stress this is not limited to the West and to Europe. This isn't just about decadent Europeans failing to make babies anymore. Within about a century, China will demographically fall off the cliff edge. This is going to change the world, just like climate change and all the other things that people talk about. This is a really significant issue, and it's not a healthy thing that a Prime Minister won't touch it for fear of being seen to pass comment on people's life choices.
And isn't that the point? We need to be thinking about it, because if you start thinking about it, you may find there are some policy initiatives that would at least help. They may be the ones you were mentioning.
Well, yeah, but he
won't even think about it.
But he is thinking about it. They've pledged to build how many homes? He's got another man buying his knickers, so I don't know. But you know, the policy areas that they have focused on during the election, during the run-up to the election in the manifesto, they would help with women being able to have more babies. Flexible working, that's come in. That has been a real boost to people feeling more secure that they can have babies and keep their jobs. So I think he is doing the right things, but he's just not explicitly saying, oh, breed. Like, we don't need him to do that. We need him to actually provide a framework in which it's easy and cheap to be able to have babies, and currently it isn't.
All right, well, we'll leave that to the Holy Father, because he has been encouraging people to have more babies and fewer pets. Thank you, and goodbye to my panel. In a moment, I'll be speaking to one of the most eminent journalists of his generation to remind the left-wing elite that they sided with a sex offender over the Sun newspaper.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Would you have Harry back with open arms? And this is Ian. Hi, Ian. Harry is unfortunately not well. He's an emotional wreck. Ian, you actually took the words out of my mouth. I remember when I was younger, queuing up for hours for West Ham tickets. I'm that sad. But at least I got the ticket. It was my ticket. They knew it was me, and there were no touts involved. It's Forever says Harry can stay away. He was so quick to condemn this country as racist and to trash the Queen and royal family's reputations. He should be banished and his titles removed. He has not earned the right to call himself anything with a royal title. Ooh, passionate. Since moving to the US with Meghan, the American dream has had a number of issues for him, I think it's fair to say. But if Harry was to return, would he be welcome? And could he make it up with William? Look, if Oasis, sorry I said the O word, have done it, can William and Harry?
Well, I think it's going to present a lot of challenges. I mean, I've got to be clear here. When it comes to reconciliation, if it's possible, obviously, to mend the rift with William, clearly that is to be welcomed. But as for Harry returning, what precisely would that mean? What precisely would Harry want? Because if it is in any sense a return to royal duties, you really got to be very, very careful with what you're dealing with. As far as the royal family are concerned, for goodness sake, reconciliation, yes, but actual work as a senior working royal, Not in my opinion.
So I always think it's quite funny listening to serious people talk seriously about the royals, because it's not that serious, a lot of it. But actually, I think where I'm fascinated by them is that we can sort of see a bit of ourselves as a society and as individuals.
GB News, the People's Channel. Weekdays on GB News. Wake up to breakfast every day from 6 a.m. Followed by Britain's newsroom at 9:30. At noon, it's Good Afternoon Britain. Followed by Martin Daubney from 3 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's Patrick Christys tonight, and here we do things differently. It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it? It's explosive. I mean, this is very good. It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial. And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born. It's everything you need to kickstart your evening. Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it. That's Patrick Christys tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes. Thank you for joining us on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Huw Edwards has today received a 6-month suspended sentence for child sex abuse crimes. This sentencing comes after he was furiously defended by many well-known Liberals, and the Sun was viciously accused of ruining the life of a now proved paedophile. The left-wing activist, admittedly before sentencing, John Sopel, said this.
We now know there was no illegality. So what are you left with? Someone's private life has come under scrutiny, who is now unwell. I think it would be a crying shame if this is the last we see of Huw Edwards on television, when the allegations have turned out to be not that much.
And self-proclaimed comedian Jonathan Pye made his feelings about Rupert Murdoch clear.
Man's in hospital. Rupert Murdoch, he threw a grenade and let the rest of us do the rest of the work. They lit the fuse and let you and me put 2 and 2 together and make Jimmy Savile the sequel.
Well, I'm joined now by former political editor of The Sun, Trevor Kavanagh. Trevor, first of all, it is important to say that those 2 quotations were before Huw Edwards had been found guilty of any crime. But the assumption was that The Sun was wrong to report something that was true.
Yes, the assumption was that we couldn't be right. That was the essence of it. And people like Alistair Campbell, who frankly is beyond the pale when it comes to any sort of reasonable stance on our newspaper. But more than even those, the most disappointing example was our former editor, David Yelland, who really should know better, who accused our editor, Victoria Newton, of an act of terror against Huw Edwards. And yet now we are at the end of this long, long process where a man has been convicted and sentenced to jail, although suspended, for a crime which is truly heinous. When you think about what's involved here, what he was watching and enjoying and paying for and funding, therefore, was an international child sex sort of gang, which he was witnessing child rape.
It is disgusting. I mean, it is. The newspapers have reported it's unbelievably disgusting.
Yes.
What he confessed to in the end.
Yes, and we were pilloried for telling the truth, and we handled this story with extreme delicacy, having legal advice, which we took very, very seriously about the protection, both of the person we didn't name, who was in the end identified by his wife as Huw Edwards, and also the young person. We didn't even say which gender the young person was, although I think that's now known. So we were absolutely careful about everything we did, and we were vindicated. But worse than that, in a sense, is the way the BBC threw up a ring of silence while their own Newsnight team was already onto this story, because it was happening under their eyes with other parties who worked for the BBC, who Huw Edwards was approaching in a very inappropriate way. And they'd actually got together a programme ready to run on this. And yet the BBC shut us down anyway, with denials. And the worst thing of all, perhaps, is the fact that they knew last autumn, that he'd actually been arrested for very serious criminal offences. And yet they did nothing to him.
And what concerns me is this attempt to stop the press printing things that are wrong but may not be criminal, because the behaviour the Sun reported, the Metropolitan Police said, was not in and of itself criminal. But it was clearly wrong for a man in the position of influence that Huw Edwards was in to be behaving in this way to somebody much, much younger than him. And the left defending it on the grounds of privacy seems to me to be the death knell of freedom of speech.
Well, this is absolutely the kernel. I mean, all the rest of it is important, obviously, but the attempt to gag a respectable and legitimate newspaper writing the truth is an indication of how far we've got in recent years with disobliging facts being shut out and shut down by those in political power. Something I'm pleased to say that the Conservative government resisted, and this government, under Keir Starmer, seems to be enthusiastically driving ahead with.
And it only defends the rich and the powerful. People who abuse power are going to be able to shut down newspapers. Joe Public won't have a chance.
No, not at all. And in fact, we've seen what's happened in the Stockport riots and elsewhere as a result of those rumours that spread, mainly because the police did nothing to clarify the true situation. We've seen people being actually put in jail for offences of spreading things on TikTok and other social media, which makes you wonder why on earth Huw Edwards, who has been convicted of a very, very serious crime, is suspended. His sentence is suspended, whereas others on what might be lesser crimes are going to jail. This two-tier policing, two-tier justice is a very worrying new symptom.
And two-tier privacy, which makes you wonder who else is not being reported about, who the Sun, even the Sun, is fearful of revealing the truth about.
Well, I think there are quite a lot of people who hide behind draconian legal advice, and they are gagging laws, basically, and the right to privacy is a very powerful defence against the intrusion of legitimate news gathering.
Well, Trevor, thank you very much. I think the sentencing of Huw Edwards is proof of the virtues of a free press. And finally, it may not surprise you to hear that I have never tried a smoothie in my life. And news from today has suggested the drink isn't as healthy as first thought. But my production team has insisted today, in the interest of science, that I try one of these ghastly things. So here goes. It is a very strange colour. Oh, my Lord, it's disgusting. Absolutely revolting. I would strongly recommend you don't try one. I hear the fruit ones all have bananas in, which are a sin against the Holy Ghost. Anyway, up next is Patrick Christys. Patrick, you're not going to have a smoothie on your bill of fare this evening, are you?
No, it's a really interesting way to end the show, I must say, but no, good stuff. I've got loads on tonight, Jacob. I've got an announcement at 9 p.m. at the top of the show. I am absolutely sick of the fact that pensioners in Britain are clearly at the back of the queue for everything. I think it is a moral outrage. I will not stand for it, and I will be doing something to try to help. I'll be revealing all of that at 9 p.m. Also going to be debating whether or not the Prime Minister should hand back the money from Lord Ali. Why did his wife have to have a wardrobe picked by a multi-millionaire? We've got all of that going on. The Huw Edwards stuff, obviously, and much more. So, yes, it's an action-packed show tonight.
That all sounds very exciting. It is absolutely unbelievable that a man let some other fellow buy his wife's frocks. It seems a bit mean and ungenerous. Anyway, your programme's always exciting, Patrick. I'll be back tomorrow at 8 o'clock. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg. This has been State of the Nation. Now, tomorrow, the weather you want to know about is in Lancashire, because Somerset are playing Lancashire in one of the final 2 games of the county championship. And the excitement is that if we could win both of them, and Surrey doesn't, we could, for the first time in the history of Somerset County cricket, take the championship. So pray for fine weather in Lancashire. In Somerset, the sun will be shining anyway, as always.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hi there, welcome to the latest forecast from the Met Office for GB News. It was missing throughout much of the summer, but higher pressure has now arrived. There will be some cloud in places, but for most it's clear spells through the night and during the next few days. Under this higher pressure that's centred over the UK, that's pushed a cold front south. But another weak front will move into the far northwest overnight. That's going to bring some thicker and lower clouds, so fairly murky and damp in places. Lewis Harris sky, as well as Shetland, seeing some light and patchy outbreaks of rain. Elsewhere, clear skies. Under those clear skies, temperatures falling 2 to 4 Celsius in some sheltered spots across central and southern UK. A few mist and fog patches first thing. They're not going to last soon enough. Clear skies and sunshine return across the UK. That is, except for the Northern Isles and the far north and northwest of Scotland, where it will be a grey, misty and damp start in places. Best of the sunshine across Scotland, we'd be through the central belt, eastern Scotland, and Northern Ireland seeing some decent sunny spells. But for much of southern Scotland, England and Wales, it's blue skies from the word go, and that's how it remains effectively throughout much of the day. Some patchy cloud, most likely across East Anglia and the southeast. Kent seeing a fair amount of cloud moving in. But for the north and northwest of Scotland, the cloud actually thins and it turns brighter into the afternoon and warmer as a result. Northeast Scotland, low to mid-20s, low to mid-20s further south in places as well. And it's another fine start to Wednesday. The best of the sunshine on Wednesday morning will be in the far north and west, whilst central and eastern England sees quite a lot of cloud during the morning. That disappears back to the coast during the afternoon, leading to another warm and fine day for many. Thursday's very similar, but on Friday, some showers